4 years. 4 years since Liz Truss became the Prime Minister, crashed the economy in 45 days, and was escorted out Downing Street to a eulogy from a supermarket vegetable. And she was on LBC this week, not to apologise or to reflect. She was there, initially to talk about Mandelson vetting scandal, which is fair enough, it's the big news at the moment. She has things to say about, dysfunctional government. But the interview kept sliding somewhere more revealing, because wherever Truss is normally there to discuss, there's only one thing she's been doing constantly since October of 2022, and that's explaining why what happened to her wasn't her fault. For 4 years, and she's still banging on about it. Isn't it time somebody, give her an intervention?
If the Bank of England hadn't announced the sale of £40 billion worth of gilts the night before, this wouldn't have happened.
So what effect did your budget have on any of it? None?
Very little. Very little.
The former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom describing the effect of her own budget on the market chaos that followed it. The budget that she introduced as Prime Minister of the country, and there was none, very little of anything to do with her. Here's what actually happened. In September of 2022, Kwasi Kwarteng announced a $45 billion in unfunded tax cuts. The gilt market went into immediate freefall and the pound tanked to nearly parity with the dollar. The Bank of England launched an emergency bond buying programme to prevent pension funds from collapsing. Mortgages rates, they spiked across the country. The IMF issued a public rebuke of the UK's economic policy, which almost never happens to a G7 country. The Treasury Select Committee concluded the mini-budget was the primary cause for the market instability. It cost billions in emergency intervention. Now, Truss has a counter-argument, and parts of it aren't entirely invented. A 2024 review did find that the LDI pension fund sector had structural vulnerabilities. The Bank of England's timing of certain decisions was not without criticism. But the bank also played a role, and my budget had none of it or very little effect are completely different claims. Every serious analysis of the period, the OBR, the IMF, the Treasury Select Committee, all found that the mini-budget was the primary driver, not a contributing factor. The primary driver. Truss says there's a narrative being created by people who didn't want change.
Done the budget.
There's a narrative being created, Tom, by people who support Keynesian economics and don't want to change the system, that it was somehow my fault. That's simply not true.
People who support Keynesian economics. That's her description of the IMF, the OBR, and the Treasury Select Committee. A conspiracy theory. But let's get the specific claim that needs pulling apart, because this is where she gets really, really creative.
Had you followed the Hang on a sec. Had you followed the processes laid out for other people to do other budgets in different ways?
I did follow the process.
You ignored the OBR. You
there was
told
no.
the OBR
Well,
to
I mean, this is
take
getting
the running jump.
really into the weeds here. But the OBR only have to be consulted twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
I did not have to consult the OBR at all. I did everything within the process laid out.
Yes, the OBR Act mandates 2 forecasts per year tied to fiscal events. What she admits, and what she always admits, is that the OBR chair, Richard Hughes, confirmed in a letter to MPs that the OBR sent a draft forecast to Kwarteng on his first day in office and explicitly offered to update it in time for publication along with the growth plan. They offered in writing. The government declined to commission it. Hughes confirmed that they would have been in the position to do so to a standard that satisfied the legal requirements of the Charter for Budget Responsibility. She was offered independent scrutiny of her own economic plan, and she said no. And it's not hard to understand why. An OBR forecast would have shown in advance on paper that $45 billion in unfunded tax cuts would produce exactly the market response that followed. Bypassing the OBR wasn't her administration efficiency. It was her avoiding the one mechanism designed to catch this kind of thing before it blew up in public. And guess what? It blew up in public. I followed the process while declining the process' most important safeguard is not following the process. Now, 2 moments that got buried under all of this and probably shouldn't have.
And I think we've got a system that is wedded to an economic system that doesn't work, that's wedded to mass migration, that's wedded to things like net zero, all the policies that aren't working for our country. So
well, let me ask you about one policy that some people think isn't working. Would you, in order to help the day-to-day spending, would you want the government to look again at the triple lock? £15 billion by 2030, that's going to cost.
I think there does need to be a new system. I certainly do. And I think...
Including on the triple lock?
Including on the triple lock. And I think the British public want bold change.
A Conservative former Prime Minister on the afternoon radio confirming that the triple lock should go. Reform aren't touching it because pensioners are their voters. The current government has dodged it for all of its budgets, and here is Truss apparently unable to help herself, saying it out loud on LBC. And then there was this.
Trump's been a good president.
I do. I think he's been
even
a very
on
good
the
president.
Iran.
I think he's been a very good president, and I think if we'd had Kamala Harris, we would be the West would be facing a very, very serious crisis.
Do you think
now.
the war in Iran is justified?
I do. I believe that the nuclear weapons that the Iranians were developing are a threat not just to the Middle East but to global stability. And I watched. I was Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister when Biden was in, and I just watched the can being kicked down the road again and again, and the Iranians playing the system.
There's an active war involving Iran right now, one of that has disrupted global oil markets, destabilised the Middle East and drawn UK military assets into proximity with the conflict through our bases in Cyprus and Bahrain. One where, before the first strikes in 2025, US intelligence had assessed that Iran had not reauthorised its nuclear weapons programme. A former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom was asked about that and she said, "I do." The tone that you would use to confirm a restaurant booking. Even Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage had to row back on their support for the war once they realised it wasn't popular with the British public. She hasn't got a clue. She is so out of touch. But if you look past all the noise and you get down to the bottom of it, it's not really about the Bank of England or the OBR or even Iran. It's about someone who operated at the absolute peak of executive power, whose decisions had immediate and measurable effects on millions of people's lives, and who has spent the last 4 years constructing an alternate version of events where she is not responsible for any of it. That takes real commitment. Most people would have been removed from office while the supermarket vegetable outlasted them and go, at a minimum, very quiet for a very long time. Truss was on LBC, explaining that her budget did very little, endorsing the war and calling the triple lock to be scrapped. Still certain, still not responsible. The lettuce, for the record, was also unavailable for comment. To be fair, Kemi Badenoch hasn't forgotten how to be a Conservative, with her plan to make kids poor to pay for the military, which you can see in the video that's on screen now. Thanks for watching, don't forget to hit that like button, and I'll see you next time.